This is My First Job in Sports web series, presented by SBRnet, your comprehensive source of sports data to the academic community. Here are the hosts of My First Job in Sports, Neil Schwartz and Mark Sullivan.
Welcome to My First Job in Sports, presented by SBRnet. We're the one show on the internet where you can get inspiration, motivation, and yes, navigation on getting that all-important first job in sports. I'm Neil Schwartz, your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mark Sullivan. Big Marky, how are you today?
Neil, I'm doing great, and I'm excited about our first episode of 2022.
Yeah, we've got a super guest today, and I know, Mark, you'll get to the introduction. But Mark, we're early into 2022, and it has been a really, really active year for SBRnet so far. Mark, do you want to run down a little bit of the highlights?
Yes. Well, first of all, we have completely revamped our website, updated our data, brought in some great content partners. That's all good. And then I guess we capped the year off, Neil, by winning the Library Works Award as one of the top data providers to college libraries. So that was a big win for us, and a real nice validation of a lot of the work we've done.
Yeah, every year Library Works, which is one of those companies that services and does a lot of work within both academic and public libraries, has their Modern Library Awards. And we were really excited to be named a Platinum Award winner, as a data vendor, to both public and academic libraries. And Mark, I know, you and I have worked really hard to reshape SBRnet and to really become an amazing resource for students, for faculty, for librarians, and also our commercial accounts. So it's been a really, great first year, and looking forward to an awesome 2022. Our brand new fan study is out of the field, and we hope to have data ready in about 2 weeks, which puts us about a week ahead of schedule. So I'm really excited about that. But Mark, without any more delay, why don't you get to our guest today and talk a little bit about Russ Scibetti?
Yeah, so Russ Scibetti is VP of Business Information for the New York Giants, and he is one of those rare individuals. He will fully admit to, I'm sure, being a data nerd. But in addition to being a data nerd, he's smart, he's personable, he's articulate, and he'll have some great insights to share for our audience today.
Russ, welcome to My First Job in Sports.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Anything that I can do that might help someone who's trying to get into the industry, I'm all for it.
All right. So you and I were emailing back and forth this morning, and you actually made your first step into the industry while you were pursuing your graduate degree, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. My original background wasn't in sports. I pretty much grew up in New Jersey, and like a lot of people, New Jersey folks do, I went to Rutgers. And I was a computer science major primarily, although I spent most of my time in the marching band. That's as close to the actual on-field performance as I got. But I was a computer science major. I worked in IT for 3-4 years, and honestly was pretty unhappy about it. I just didn't really have any career direction. Took a couple of part-time business classes and fell in love with that. And that's kind of what led me to eventually go to Arizona State to get my MBA, and sort of opened up the door to figure out, can sports be a possible career path for me?
So let's sort of unpack that a little bit. So you go to Rutgers, you're out there working. What was it that compelled you to go pursue your master's? Did you think, hey, I'm going to go to Arizona State, get my master's, and then move into sports? What was your thought process there?
Thought process there was, I knew I wanted to go get a really good MBA, and the WP Carey program at Arizona State was a great program, as one of a few that I was looking at. And I always loved the idea of working in sports, but never really knew what paths could take me there. Didn't really even understand the business side of the industry yet. But as I was looking at those programs, I was specifically trying to seek out ones that I thought could open that door. And started having conversations even with some of the faculty there. They gave me reading materials. A gentleman's name was Dr. Michael Mokwa. He's like, you should read Sports Inc. You should read The Business of Sports. And he gave me some recommendations. And what that did was really help me kind of realize what my paths could start to look like. So again, that combined with the MBA at Arizona State, I needed to pivot. And so for me, going to get that degree would be good for me to kind of start that pivot.
Russ, this morning I was looking at your background on LinkedIn, and I have to be honest, I almost felt like I wanted to be you after I was done reading through your background. It's that terrific. So let's jump around a little bit. You're currently Vice President of Strategy and Business Intelligence for the New York Giants. Tell me a little bit about that position and really what that's all about and what you're responsible for.
Sure. The fun thing is, so I work on the business side of the house, nothing about what's happening, on the field. And my job is to really help all the business side leverage technology and data for decision making. So that involves everything from managing our CRM platforms and marketing automation, data warehousing, data visualization, predictive models, who's going to renew, who's going to purchase, helping our partnerships team with research and insights. Really anything we can do to tap into the data to keep driving the business forward. So I report up to our chief commercial officer, but I get to collaborate across all the different lines of business.
So when you say all the different lines of business, I assume that means ticket sales. Does it include sponsorships, merchandise, concessions, everything?
All of the above. Anything that we can use data for on the business side or on revenue. So that could be tickets, suites, sponsorships, things with the stadium, which would be concessions. I look at e-commerce data. I look at digital marketing data. So whether it's aggregating it for executive dashboards or diving into it to try to identify trends, make predictions, kind of all that stuff funnels through, and we get to work with all of it.
Russ, you seem to be, really at the forefront of this data-driven decision-making process. It's something that I talk about frequently when I am talking with students and doing class presentations. But how is it being received by, let's say, some of the old-timers or some of the old guard, in the NFL, specifically at the New York Giants, being so data-driven and less reliant on, all the things that they've done in the past?
Listen, that's going to vary a lot organization to organization, right? I feel really lucky. My boss came from an organization before the Giants that was very data driven. So when he came here, that's the way he wanted to operate. All the department heads were excited about expanding what we're doing in that area. So everyone said culture and executive buy-in is absolutely critical to get any type of data initiatives off the ground. And the great part is when I walked in, that part was already done. So it was just how fast can we go? What do we prioritize? And show the results.
So Russ, maybe we could back up a little bit and you could take us through your career progression. Arizona State, while you were there, you got your first foot in the door there. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I honestly look at grad school not just as my degree, but I look at it as my first job in sports. Going to that program was great, but it also came with a graduate assistantship. And so what I did that summer between my 2 years and the whole second year at Arizona State, I worked for the athletic department. So I thought at the time I was going to pursue a path in college athletics. So that's kind of what led me to that particular position. I had a boss on the day-to-day who I was doing a lot of all the traditional marketing, working with football, wrestling, volleyball, softball, all the different sports. But because of my background, I also got to work on other projects. We had a thing called the Devil's Domain Loyalty Program. We were doing email marketing. We were doing attendance predictions. So I really got to dive into some of the CRM and analytics side, this is back in 07, 08, in a college environment. So it was pretty progressive, which was great for me. And what I learned there was the college environment's great, but what I really enjoyed wasn't necessarily that. It was the projects. It was, I have a technology background, and here's this whole new way to apply it that's not traditional technology. And so that year there was great training, and that led me to my second job actually in sports, which was in Philly with Comcast Spectacor.
Russ, you've got a tremendous background in sports, and I want to get back to some of those things also, but I want to take a little bit of a pivot. As I was looking at your professional background, there's something I noticed there about being the founding editor of thebusinessofsports.com. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that Mark and I frequently speak to sports marketing, sports business, data analytics classes at universities around the country. And one of the things that I always touch on is, and this is also, by the way, represented on the SBRnet site, is, who are the people you should be following? Whether it's a podcast, whether it's social media, whether it's a blog. And I notice, of course, you're producing your own blog. So I'd like to get a little bit of information and understand that. One of the things that I brought up is that one of our interns from the Falk School at Syracuse also has a podcast. They call themselves the Numbers Guys, and he's a data guy, data nerd, and he'll kill me for saying that, I'm sure. But again, it seems like
He's
you're
also really big. He's way bigger than Neil.
oh, flatten me. But again, Russ, tell me a little bit about, what it was to start this, the businessofsports.com.
Sure. I actually started it while I was in grad school, so it kind of ties in even to the last comment. My strengths were very much on the technology and the data. Felt very, very comfortable with all of that. What I learned in business school was you need to be able to communicate what you're doing. That's presentation skills, that's writing skills, storytelling, right? I kind of called it finding my voice. And so I attacked that a bunch of different ways. Before I even get to the blog, I did a public speaking group called Toastmasters. We called it Toast Devils because the ASU was the Sun Devils. That was one of the best things I did because I was able to overcome tics and uncomfortable elements of public speaking. That's led to a whole bunch of opportunities where I've spoken at conferences and whatnot, but I could not recommend that type of organization more for the presentation skills. But then there's the writing skills. And so social media was just taking off at that time, 2007, 2008. People were talking about Twitter and blogging and LinkedIn. And I was like, all right, let's jump in. And I made my Twitter account, set up my blog. On Twitter, technically, I'm the first person to ever use the hashtag sportsbiz. Like I actually have proof of this. So I jumped in early. And for me, it was originally about writing. It was like, all right, let me share my knowledge. Let me get comfortable, again, communicating, more through written word rather than analysis. But what that also led into was networking opportunities. It was I'm connecting with people through my blog, through LinkedIn, through Twitter that I would never normally have the chance to meet. And so it just sort of built up this audience where now my name was having value associated. Everyone talks about your personal brand. So for me, that was a tool, especially in those first few years, to network, to share, to connect. We even spun off actual networking events from the blog. We did something called Sports Business Week, where we were hosting networking events all around the country. From someone who's honestly normally quite introverted, rather than attending someone else's event, I just made my own. Like it actually made me feel more comfortable because I was the host. I had a natural reason to talk to people. And all that stuff ties back to the blog and ties back to just trying to, connect through social.
Russ, one of the things, I've always prided myself on, I'm a data junkie just like you are. And, but the thing I learned early is that data is a wonderful tool, but being able to tell a story with it and also being able to get up in front of a large group of people, being able to put it into a story of some sort so that people are able to understand it. But I always found it also important to not just, have tunnel vision with the data, but really also to be very versatile. Tell me about some of the things that you're reading right now or have been reading, over the years, because I really want to try to provide a lot of, background and a lot of things for those, students that are looking to get that first job in sports.
Sure. Honestly, one of the things that I use most, I was very active on Twitter for a long time. I look for the SportsBiz hashtag. I look for the sponsorship hashtag. I look for things that people are sharing there.
Sure.
Of course, I read all the usual trade things around Sportico and Sports Business Journal and Sport Business. My LinkedIn feed, LinkedIn has really come a long way in terms of being a real good quality source of content.
Agreed.
Rather than just people looking for jobs.
Agreed.
One of the books I've read most recently that I really enjoyed, off the top of my head, is from Adam Grant, a book called Think Again, which ties in directly to what you were saying, Neil. It's really about trying to, how do you overcome objections differently? How do you create productive conversations when you have folks that might have kind of pre-ingrained notions? How do you kind of overcome your own pre-ingrained notions about how something should be? How do you kind of take different looks at it? Mm-hmm. Really enjoyed that book. So that's one I would, that's top of my list lately.
Yeah, one of the books I like to cop to, and I do talk about this, is that I love reading, a lot of the Malcolm Gladwell business books, because I just find that, some of the things that he has to say are just, just apply to so many different areas. There's also, and I can't remember the author's name, but he wrote the book First Ask Why. I forgot the
Simon
gentleman.
Sinek.
Yeah. Simon Sinek. And I love that book because, again, as a data person who wants to learn how to use data to tell a story, why is always one of those big questions, along with who, what, when, where, and how. So I've always prided myself on that. But you also talked about something that we talk about on all of our shows, and that is networking. Talk a little bit about how important that was for you, Russ, and then how you could advise students to use networking to their greatest advantage.
Sure. I mean, relationships, whether through networking or through people that I've worked with, have been really critical in my career. So
Sure.
I'll kind of tackle that a couple different ways. Even just going from Arizona State to Philadelphia to the Comcast Spectacor, I was mostly working with the Flyers. That came about through a relationship, right? That came about through my boss at Arizona State was a gentleman named Steve Hank. He was very close with Sean Tilger, who was an SVP at the Flyers, and said, hey, let me help you connect with people. So it started off as just a pure networking call. Let me introduce you to this person, that person. And I started talking to Sean, and Sean said, well, this sounds great, but this is not my area. You really need to talk to Mark. And he was talking to a guy named Mark DiMaurizio. And he made the introduction. He didn't have to do this, but he did. He made the introduction directly to Mark. And so I built a relationship with Mark, and this was months before I graduated, but it was just, again, trying to build, not just collect names, but build quality relationships. So we had a couple of great conversations while I was still in school. I graduated in May. I'm looking for jobs. It's a little slow. Sometimes that happens. And he contacted me that summer, said, hey, I just had a CRM analyst that took a new job. I remember our conversations from the spring. Is this something you'd be interested in? If I remember correctly, you were coming back east, and I was in New Jersey. That's how I got that job, was because of the relationship that I developed through those introductions. So, that kind of laid the groundwork. And almost all my jobs have started in some fashion through a relationship, going from the Flyers to the Jets.
Right.
That happened from some old classmates of mine who introduced me to the person that became my boss at the Jets. So it was ingrained in me really early. It was ingrained on me at ASU. Another gentleman, a guy named AJ Maestas, who runs Navigate Research, he was one of the alums of our program. He essentially, I vividly remember this happy hour we had where with all of my classmates, and he said, listen, our program is great, but no one's going to do it for you. You need to go make relationships. You need to go figure out the ways to open up doors, and that's where you're going to carve your path. And so that led to those informational interviews. That led to the idea of starting networking events, just to keep that thing going, keep that engine going of always finding new relationships and figuring out ways to create value for those people when you start that relationship, right? Because if you can help them with something now, that just creates this universe of people that can hopefully help you down the road.
So I forgot, Russ, that you had actually worked for the Jets and the Giants. You're a member of a small club. I know there are a number of athletes who played for both teams, so to speak. Any pushback on that, or are you welcomed? Or are you a blue brother now that you work for the Giants?
I definitely have a lot more blue in my wardrobe at home. I mean, it's funny. I grew up a Giants fan. I actually grew up a Giants, Yankees, and Rangers fan. So Rangers, my first job was with the Flyers. Giants fan, had a job with the Jets. Like you guys know this, right? Like some of those elements, definitely you need to let go of in order to have those opportunities in your career. And the Jets experience was phenomenal. I love those 5 years there. I wasn't even looking to leave. It just kind of had an opportunity arrive that I couldn't pass up. And so, no, there was no issues here. If anything, the Jets and Giants relationship is interesting, right? Yes, we are competitive in a sense that we're both in the market, and the two biggest teams in the biggest market, but we collaborate in the stadium, right? There's a lot of folks over there that I still know that are still there from when I was there, and so things that we need to collaborate on, it's actually really easy because it's just like we were working together years ago.
So one of the things Neil knows that I started teaching a class at Montclair State here in the great state of New Jersey, and this particular week's class was on data. And fortunately, Neil came in and he was our guest speaker. But I talked to the students about how teams are using data on just about everything these days, from ticket sales to concessions to merchandise. Can you share a couple examples of data that you've seen and that is really important to you, and maybe some data you've seen where you looked at it and you're like, oh my God, holy smokes, this is not what we expected. And that really maybe prompted you guys to change some policies or change some ways of doing business?
Man, off the cuff there. I mean, there's tons of data that we're constantly looking at, right? The most common examples, there's definitely more on the ticketing side maybe than the partnerships, because there tends to be a lot more data about consumers than there is necessarily about the business side. Although even that's shifting. So, I mean, one of the first things we did here was try to build fence sitter models, right? Let's take a look at our customer base, anyone that has decided to leave versus those that are renewing. How can we look at their behaviors, look at where they're sitting, how long they've been a customer, any of those different kind of behavioral and demographic elements, and try to build a model and essentially identify someone that we think might be more at risk or might have more of an opportunity to upgrade. So that was one of the first things is taking all of these different data that was here. It was just in separate places, right? Bringing it together, consolidating it around the customer so that way we could figure out what was most likely to happen with each of those customers. And then from there, you build a strategy on it. You build an email strategy. You build a telemarketing strategy. You build a retention team. How many people do you need on the retention team to manage those accounts? So all of that starts by looking at your base, understanding it. Sometimes it's not a model. Sometimes it's just good quality basic reports. Like, honestly, I feel a lot of times the word analytics is overused. Analytics sometimes just starts with just good record keeping and good reporting and good dashboarding and just making things easier to view. Some of the biggest impact we've had is really about just making the data available for people, so everyone can kind of improve their day-to-day process.
Russ, one of the things that I talk about a lot, and Mark does too, is the value of internships and being able to get out there and apply and learn some of these skills. In fact, one of our recent interns is now working for the San Francisco Giants out in California, and he's working on the business side also. In fact, he's working on the concession side right now and using data analytics for everything from, determining, how many hot dogs to buy to chicken nugget preferences. And, certain teams apparently tend to sell more soda and all these things,
Well,
how
Neil,
important.
I have to interrupt you. For the San Francisco Giants, they're not eating chicken wings. They're having like tofu burgers and edamame and, a very healthy life out there in San Francisco.
Okay, Mark, but how important, Russ, would you place internships in this kind of whole matrix?
Oh, they're critical. I mean, again, my first job was a graduate assistantship, which essentially is a grad school version of the internship, right? I was supposed to only work like 10 to 15 hours a week. I would work 10 hours just on football weekends, right? Like,
Sure.
so that went out the window. Those internships are great because the classroom is wonderful. I have nothing but great things to say about my classroom experience. I'm in the classroom now. I teach, right? I teach a BI course at Columbia. So the academic elements are absolutely critical to building your knowledge base, building skills, but having practical experience where you've been able to say, all right, yeah, I know how to do this in Excel, but now I'm actually looking at what ticketing data looks like. Because when you get into the real world, nothing is as clean and easy as the examples you typically get in a classroom, right? So everything is messy and complicated and connecting different pieces. So someone that just has dealt with a ticketing system, has dealt with a CRM platform, those little elements just make it so easy to onboard someone. You don't have to train them from scratch. It really makes you stand out as an applicant. I honestly, I look at interns just as important as jobs.
Sure.
When you're looking at their qualifications.
So, Russ, a little bit of lightning round here. I was looking again at your bio, and you said the person in the industry you would most like to meet. Do you want to fill in the blank on that one?
Oh, that was probably from the SBJ profile. That would have been Adam Silver.
Okay, it is. It's Adam Silver. Why?
I think you just look at him and his track record of as commissioner, even before commissioner, of making tough decisions, getting buy-in from different stakeholders, having a vision really of where a sport is going,
Sure.
where the teams need to go, being able to communicate vision clearly, right? There's areas I'm still to this day much more comfortable with the quantitative elements, but to think about someone who can consume that from different places and guide and have that forward-looking perspective, I just think he does an excellent job of that.
Okay, part 2 of the lightning round. Profession I would most likely like to attempt.
That would have been a professional poker player.
Okay, that's going to need an explanation, dude.
I play poker. It's been my hobby for a long time now. I started playing poker even before what people call the poker boom, right? When Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker on ESPN, and all of a sudden everyone started playing Hold'em. I was playing before that, not that much, but a little before that. And yeah, I took to it. Having a quantitative background is not the worst thing in the world when you're sitting at a poker table. And so it's fun. I've had some decent results over the years. I'm still a little risk averse, so that would probably put a cap on how far I go down that path. But yeah, you never know. Might be something to try in the future.
Well, I'm sure your bosses are very happy to know that you're risk averse. So.
Hey, Mark and I really want to thank Russ Scibetti, Vice President of Strategy and Business Intelligence for the New York Football Giants. Russ, before we let you go, though, there's a couple questions I do love to kind of get in there. Russ, when you were in school, what would you consider some of the most important classes that you took?
So I'll give you one from undergrad and one from grad school. In undergrad, ironically, the most important class I took was on database management systems, which is a class I hated and struggled with.
Right.
Again, I was a comp sci major, but when you get into analytics, you have to think about everything in terms of relationships between tables and rows and everything. So I can just feel very comfortable thinking in that scheme. So that was the biggest thing I took from undergrad. In grad school, it was a class on CRM and research, and it really was essentially, made me think about technology not from the technical piece, right? It wasn't about administration and coding. It was about application and results, but technology as a tool to get you there. So the theme there really is the classes that gave me harder skill development that I was able to then figure out an application for.
Russ, you have quite a background, but I'm going to have to just stretch this out just a little bit more. What would be the one skill that you would advise every college student who's looking to get that all-important first job in sports to ensure that they have?
Well, listen, if you're trying to get a first job in analytics, right, in a BI related capacity, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I have my standard answer is kind of your Analyst Toolkit. There's 3 things you need to develop: SQL, visualization, and modeling. Those are the tools. So SQL is probably the most universal because you can't analyze data unless you can get data from a system. So you need to know that. And then a visualization tool so you can storytell and communicate, and a modeling language so you can truly analyze and make good decisions, right? So that's kind of the trifecta of elements that you need to kind of break into those roles.
Russ, I think I want to be you when I grow up. I mean, our philosophies are very much aligned, and a lot of what you've done, really has really obviously been good for your career and also been good for your employers. So Mark and I, again, want to thank you for coming on My First Job in Sports. Appreciate the time. And thanks again.
Oh, you're welcome. Appreciate you guys having me. It was fun. And again, if I can be helpful to people that are trying to get into their career, that everyone wins. So thank you.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Russ.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of My First Job in Sports, presented by SBRnet. You can check out the video version on the SBRnet Video Corner on YouTube. You can also catch the audio version on all major podcast platforms. Just search for My First Job in Sports. My First Job in Sports is produced by Brad Mabey. You can connect with us on all social media platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, or check us out at sbrnet.com. Thank you for tuning in.